Explore the World Wide Web, and you'll find a global soapbox for the free exchange of ideas. The technology makes it difficult to regulate, but easy to use. Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the web, made information available to everyone at the click of a button.
When you're looking at a web page and you click on a hypertext link, information about how to put up that page comes back across the internet. So it's really very simple. It's just get me gobbledygook, here's gobbledygook.
That has had the most astonishing effect.
Once you get onto it, it opens a completely new world. At the moment, the globalizers have got all the technology, except for the web, which belongs to the people.
Over the last 30 years, a communication revolution has been taking place. The pioneers of the information age have changed the world with the invention of the internet, electronic mail, and most recently, the World Wide Web. Their story explains how a global forum for free speech was created. In 1990, Tim Berners-Lee was working at CERN in Switzerland, the place where scientists from all over Europe come together to smash atoms apart. But Tim wanted to build something. He was fed up with the chaos of information buried in the countless computers used at CERN. The World Wide Web was about to be born.
We just couldn't go on with these incompatibilities between different systems. I'd spent myself a lot of time taking information from one format and converting it to another format, taking it from one machine and moving it into another machine, writing programs to do these conversions and stuff. So basically it was, if you like, a generic answer to all these problems. And at the same time, just a fantastically appealing vision of the universe of all information. The only problem was that I wasn't supposed to be working on it. So when I said, hey, I think we should make a completely general global hypertext system, the very proper answer at CERN was, well, I'm here for. So in fact, it was only because my boss, Mike Sandel, who was, had a sort of twinkle in his eye and thought, I don't know what this is about, but I kept a feeling that this sounds kind of exciting. And that he said, well, why don't you spend the next couple of months, I won't complain if you just go and write the program. That if Mike hadn't said that, if I'd have had to go through the process of trying to get a formal project approved, it would never have happened.
The gamble paid off. Tim invented the web.
I was pretty excited about it. From what I've heard from other people say afterwards, I waved my hands around a whole lot and talked rapidly and non-stop about it. But it was very difficult to explain to people. If you show somebody one web page, it's not a big deal. If you show somebody 2 or 3 web pages, it's not a big deal. You have to go to jump, make the jump. Just imagine that all kinds of things, which is easy to imagine now after the event. But before that, it was very difficult to get people to make that leap to imagine what happened if everybody did this. Wouldn't it be amazing? Different communities suddenly became aware of it. The technical press became aware of it, and the internet community became aware of it. And then later on, some of the daily papers had cottoned onto it, and then later on, heads of state were aware of it. And to each community, in a way, it broke very suddenly. But it was a very slow transition from trying to persuade everybody, worrying that it was going to crash, because a lot of curves do this, and to realizing that it was getting some momentum. It's like pushing a bobsled that for a while, I've never done it, but it looks as though you have to push and push and push and push and push, and then there comes a time when you realize it's time to jump in, and then you have to worry about steering and the curves later on. So that transition happened around 1993.
By then, lots of people were writing web pages using HTML, the hypertext markup language Tim created. Click on any web page, and you can see the HTML behind it.
In fact, what happens is the text is there, and if it's a paragraph, for example, there's an angle bracket, which means this isn't actually something you want to show on the screen. And then there's a P, which means this is a paragraph, and there's no angle bracket saying now you go on showing stuff on the screen. But basically, the idea of HTML is pretty simple.
It's not just pages that make up the web. The thing that really makes it a web of information are the links between the pages. Tim's brilliant idea was to let you connect your page to anyone else's without having to ask them first.
It becomes, if you like, almost a principle of free speech, that you must have the right to write a document which talks about something, without asking its permission first. Fundamentally, that design decision was the thing which allowed the web to take off.
Now the web is available anywhere you can make a telephone call, and you can use it on all sorts of computers. It's a revolution in free speech, because not only can you access information, but you can also publish your own. This is made possible because the information on the web is transported around the world over the internet, a global network of computers connected together by the telephone system.
The internet is a network of networks. And the network is cables, it's routers, it's the computers which are involved in that. So basically, the internet is something which allows you to put a packet of data in one end and get a packet of data out the other. The web is a space of pages, of documents, and pictures, which are linked together. Now, in fact, for the web to exist, all this information about the links and about the documents is transferred over the internet. So sometimes people will say, oh, I found it on the internet. But it's useful to keep the distinction.
It's wonderful. Think about the notion, the whole notion of both having an internet and a World Wide Web riding on top of it that enables you to access information all over the world, that enables them to access your information. It opens the entire world of both communication and of knowledge to every user.
Peter Salas is a computer historian who's watched the internet develop from its origins in 1966 as a US government research project to today's internet cafe. The idea in the 60s was to connect together computers in different parts of America, a network that would allow scientists to use each other's computers.
None of these rather brilliant scientists had any idea how they could construct such a network. Even after the papers had been written on, here is a way that things might be connected, it wouldn't help. They were running 4 different computers, which were incompatible with one another, so that one couldn't just toss a cable from one institution to another and expect anything to happen at all.
The Americans didn't have the technology to build their network, but they did have the money. A battle line had been drawn across Europe. The Cold War meant the United States was eager to invest in new technology to keep ahead of the Soviet Union. The US Military Advanced Research Project Agency, ARPA, put up the money for the National Computer Network. This ARPA network would eventually lead to the internet. But first, the Americans needed a little help from their friends. As Britain was swinging, a small team at the National Physical Laboratory in Middlesex was busy with its own computer network project.
We knew about the ARPA network project, but they hadn't really begun to do very much. Then in 1967, we were invited to a seminar in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and I sent Roger Scantlebury, one of my people, to give the paper, which we jointly written about our work.
Derek? Oh, so you got a drink in already?
After the meeting, they went off and had a few beers, and they thrashed out what they should do and talked intensively to Roger, and were convinced on the spot that day, changed the direction of the ARPA network.
The next time that we went back, which was about a year later, and they'd really started building the ARPA network, lo and behold, packet switching was the central architecture of their communications. And I guess that's where it all came from.
Donald Davies and his colleagues invented packet switching, the principle the internet uses to send messages between computers using a telephone call. When these old friends started their research in the 1960s, telephone calls were expensive. So they wanted lots of computer terminals to be able to send messages at the same time, along just one telephone connection.
Watch it go on.
The telephone system was working in the wrong way. It was taking a lot of trouble to set up a call, which you really only needed for a small part of the time. The line was open, somebody was sitting at his terminal, he put in a message and he was waiting for an answer back, or he was thinking about what to do next. So either way, the line was there and was not being used properly. So instead of treating data as something which passes over a pre-existing line, we regard data as a bundle of information. Now, if you send messages of short sizes and long sizes all together, then everything is dominated by the long messages because they hold up the line. And so you have to keep everything short, a short block which was being broken off of the data you want to send and then reassembled at the far end.
Carriage return is arranged to dispatch the packet, which is now seen arriving on the display.
And immediately I thought, well, we're not going to get anywhere with this unless we invent a name for these short messages. So I looked around and talked to some linguists and hit on the word packet. And it was switching of those packets which proved to be the critical feature of this new type of network.
Packet switching lets us multiplex traffic together, just as many cars get to share the same highways, rather than dedicating a lane from London, for example, to Manchester for one party to go in that lane and then finish. We allow lots of cars, in this case lots of packets, to share the common capacity.
Just like a taxi fighting its way through traffic, each packet finds its own way through the congested wiring of a computer network. When packets arrive at their destination, they're reassembled to form the original message. This is how web information travels around the internet. Pages are broken down into packets, which are reassembled in your computer. Today, it's packet switching that drives the internet. But in the 60s, when the ARPANET was beginning to grow in the States, Donald Davies couldn't persuade the government to invest in a large-scale network in Britain. The Minister for Technology at the time was Tony Benn.
The Americans had an awful lot more money than we had. I mean, people speak as if we were two countries, one of which was go-ahead and the other which wasn't. It's certainly true that the certain freedom, if you like, in America to innovate, whereas in Britain it's all very, very conservative. But most of the new technologies, you know, were funded by defence because, and this is what's interesting, in the defence area, nobody ever asked any questions about is it profitable. You had to do it. So money was poured into defence. The government picked up the tabs, the advanced work went on, and scientists found it quite satisfying to work away on projects of their own, which may or may not have had an immediate or even long-term relevance.
Vint Cerf is one of the ARPA scientists who had the freedom to experiment with the concept of packet switching. He's known by many as the father of the internet, because he played a large part in turning the ARPANET into the global internet with his work on computer protocols.
Protocol is, of course, it's a diplomatic term and something that you establish an agreement between countries, and that's called a protocol. It's also turns out to come from the Greek word protokolon, which was the table of contents of a scroll. Well, we stole that word for computer communication conventions because packets of information that computers exchange have little headers on them to say where they're going and where they came from and how much there is in that piece. So we call the procedures computer protocols. They are simply conventions for communications between computers.
The packets on a network must obey protocols, like cars have to obey the rules of the road. But just as different countries drive on different sides of the road, different networks can use different protocols. By the early 1970s, the ARPANET was one of 3 large computer networks in the USA. But because their protocols weren't the same, these networks couldn't talk to each other.
We didn't have any protocols, no procedures, no conventions that would allow computers that were on different networks to smoothly communicate with each other. That led to the Internet project. We needed to invent a uniform protocol between the end machines that would allow them to communicate, and that was what TCP/IP did.
TCP/IP, the Transmission Control Protocol and Internet Protocol, might be a mouthful, but it's the common language that lets different computers talk to each other. Vint Cerf and his colleague Bob Kahn invented this crucial technology.
It's infinitely important that they did this. It's something that none of us, from the paltriest user who only does mail and reads news, perhaps, through to a scientist like Berners-Lee, who invented the WWW, depends upon.
TCP/IP is the reason any computer in the world can join the internet and access the web. It makes global free speech possible, and the internet almost impossible to control. The job of TCP/IP is to look after the packets that carry information around the internet.
There's a good analogy between an internet packet and a postcard. Okay, a packet has a from address, a to address, and some finite content, just like a postcard does. And like a postcard, when you put packets into the internet, they don't necessarily come out in the same order. In fact, some of them don't make it at all. The post office doesn't guarantee that every postcard you put in will come out. The same is true on the internet. So you've got this unreliable service, but it runs about 100 million times faster than an ordinary postal card does. In order to make that reliable, we had to layer on top of the internet protocol, which is the postcard layer, so to speak, something called TCP, Transmission Control Protocol. And it does the job of making the electronic postcards reliable. Suppose you were sending a novel to someone, and the only way you could send it was by sending postcards. So you cut the pages of the novel up, put them on postcards, then you realize you have to number the postcards in order to let the party at the other end put them in the right order. Then you'd wonder, if some of them got lost, you'll have to retransmit them, so you'll keep copies to send. Then you realize that you need to find out whether you need to send any copies, and you have acknowledgments coming back in the form of postcards, some of which might get lost, and so you have timeouts that say, if I haven't heard anything, I'll start sending copies. Well, that allows your friend to put everything back in order, and that's what TCP does. So basically, you wound up with a very simple, description of how TCP and IP work together to take an unreliable medium and turn it into a reliable one. It took 10 years to go from the basic idea to a deployable system, which was deployed in January of 1983.
Finally, the internet was born. Scientists in different countries found that the internet brought them closer together. Sending messages around the world with electronic mail became its most popular use.
What made the networked email so valuable is that it overcame time zone problems. You couldn't be up 24 hours a day, no matter how hard we tried. And so leaving messages for each other on our respective computers made a tremendous difference.
Ray Tomlinson sent the first ever email message back in 1972.
When I was doing it, I said, this is kind of neat. I kind of like this idea. It quickly caught on and became used for everything. Meetings, scheduling trips to the beach, whatever was going on.
To get email, you need to have an address that identifies you and the computer you're using. So everybody's address is different, but they do have one thing in common. The @ sign has become a ubiquitous symbol of the connected world.
It seemed like a fairly obvious choice at the time. I sort of had a fairly limited set of characters I could choose from, and the only one that really made sense was the @ sign, since that meant this user was at that computer.
So what was the first email message?
Well, everybody asks that, and the answer is I don't really know. I was just sending a test message, so I probably just dragged my fingers across the keyboard and came up with QWERTY op, or maybe I said testing 1, 2, 3, 4, or I might sort of some quote from the Gettysburg Address or something like that. But I really don't know, and in some sense, the only reason it took as long as it did to catch on, it's been what, 26 years, 27 years, is just there were not that many computers around.
Email became the main reason for people to get connected to the internet. That's why the internet spread around the world. The unique power of electronic mail is that the same message can be sent at the same time to a whole group of people. This creates communities who can all share in one big conversation. The list of people might be friends, colleagues at work, or complete strangers. Elisa DiCarlo joined one such community, a group to discuss problem drinking.
It was like writing in my journal, but it was this journal that would talk back to you. The internet provided a place where you could be very open about how you felt about alcohol and what you were doing. And we spent a lot of time patting each other on the back about what great people we were, how supportive we were, how we were better than everybody else. You know, that basic group mentality.
The group began to feel that they could share anything, not just problems with alcohol. Reading the list of emails from the group became a regular habit for Elisa. One night, that list changed her life.
As soon as I put the email list up on the screen, I could see something was wrong because there was this one heading over and over, but then all these other headings like I'm stunned about Larry, oh my God, what Larry said. And so I found Larry's thing and I opened it up and it was a several-page detailed confession of how he murdered his daughter. When I read it, I screamed out loud and I clapped my hands over my mouth. Part of me was thinking, well, this is a joke, or it's a deranged cry for help, or it's just, it can't be real. It can't be. And to find out it was real was awful. It was like having evil come into my living room through my computer monitor. It was a profoundly life-altering experience in a really negative way.
Email made people aware that the internet was a powerful new way to share information. For better or worse, the network is now part of our lives. Email and the web have changed society thanks to the technology of the internet.
It's a technology of freedom, of free expression. Governments that want to suppress the exchange of information will find it very hard to do in the internet context because it's so global in scope and so many sources of information are available. It obviously can be abused. People can put misinformation up on the network as easily as they can put good quality information. So as consumers of that information, we have to work to find which information is accurate and real and has integrity and which information doesn't. Guess what? We've learned to do this in other media as well. We have brand names, we know about the London Times, and we expect a certain level of quality from that trademark. The same thing will evolve for the internet as well.
There's nothing in the web technology which constrains what people put out there. Really, there's things in it's what people are after, what society puts on the web. Then maybe if you're horrified about what you see in the web, it's because you're looking in the mirror of society and you're horrified at what there is in society. The great thing about the web is that if you don't click on it, you don't click on the link, you don't go and read the thing at the other end. If you find yourself continually going to places you don't like, don't go there anymore. If you're following links from some page which takes you to sites you don't like, don't follow links from that page.
Like it or not, the web is out there. The web's global reach and culture of free speech means that many politicians fear it. But for Tony Benn, the web combines his political aspirations with his fascination for technology.
What else have I got here? My answer machine and fax. Next door is my television on the internet. handheld computers. Got my pages in my pocket, one from the Labour Party, which tells me what to do, and the other, which is my own pager, telling me who to ring. I'm a bit of a sucker for this, but I use all this equipment, and I use it, I hope, for a good purpose. Gulf War. If this debate is to make sense, we should understand the area of agreement and where disagreement exists. First, no one in the House supports the regime. From the beginning of time, the control of people's minds and thoughts has been the main instrument of those in power. Henry VIII nationalised the Church of England, our oldest nationalised industry, because he wanted a priest in every pulpit, in every parish, saying God wants you to do what the King wants you to do. And Charles II nationalised the post office. When I was Postmaster General, I wondered what this early socialist in Buckingham Palace was. He wanted to open everybody's letters. Then, of course, the modern mass media, the BBC, Rupert Murdoch, CNN, and so on, have got huge powers to influence people's thinking. Now you come to the Internet. Through the Internet, people can communicate with each other, sort of undercut the media moguls. When the Liverpool dockers were locked out, they set up a website, and there were a lot of women in the Trade Union Centre in Liverpool who were trained in technology, which the unions had encouraged. And a friend of mine, a Swiss journalist, was in India, in Bombay, and he heard about the Liverpool dock strike from the unions in Bombay, who picked it up on the website. And there was one of the ships was blacked by the crew in San Francisco because they were expressing solidarity with the Liverpool dockers. Now, when that begins to happen, then the control of the minds of everybody by the guys in the top begins to erode. And I think that potentially is the most important thing. That's the equivalent of having somebody on a soapbox shouting, only it's audible all over the world.
People around the world are sharing ideas thanks to the Internet and the World Wide Web. One man invented the web, but many people have made it what it is today.
It makes me feel that very hopeful, because really from the moment the code was on the web was a development, not of me. From then on, it was the development of all these people working together at a time when it was not apparent to the media that the web was something wonderful, but they had this idea, they had an idea of how things could be. Little twinkle in their eye, like my boss when he said, okay, Tim, why don't you go ahead and write the program? The fact that people from the grassroots can just have an idea, have a dream of how something can be, and quietly work together and make a revolution which shakes the world is just such a tremendously inspiring thing. The fact that it could actually happen.